Family betrayal hits hardest at midnight. I'm Tom Bradley, and after 35 years of banking, I thought I knew the meaning of trust. Then I heard my own daughter-in-law planning to destroy my career while I stood in my kitchen, invisible in my own home. The early retirement package is perfect, Caroline whispered into her phone. Stress-related leave, then consulting role. He'll never see it coming. Steve's finally on board. By Christmas, the old man's gone and I'll have my VP position. The old man, standing 3 feet away from her. She wanted me gone? She'd built her promotion on my forced retirement? Used my grief over Margaret's death as ammunition? I set my water glass down silently. Sometimes the prey becomes the predator. What Caroline didn't know could fill volumes, but what she was about to discover would destroy everything she'd worked for. You know what they say about underestimating quiet people? You're about to find out why that's a fatal mistake. Hit that subscribe button. This story gets wild, and I want you along for every shocking twist. Here's how one overheard conversation triggered a professional earthquake that left careers in ruins. The signs had been there for months, but grief makes you miss things. Since Margaret passed 3 years ago, work became my anchor. Maybe that made me an easier target. Caroline joined Piedmont Regional Bank as Director of Human Resources 2 years back. MBA from Duke, sharp suits, always talking about modernizing our approach. At family dinners, she'd make comments. Dad, you work too hard. At your age, shouldn't you be thinking about slowing down? Steve would nod along. Caroline's right, Dad. You've earned some rest. But I wasn't ready. Banking was all I had left. The first real incident happened in October. I walked into Conference Room B for our monthly loan committee meeting. Caroline was there, clipboard in hand, talking to Richard Hayes, our bank president. Tom, Richard said, looking uncomfortable, Caroline thinks you might benefit from stepping back from the Morrison account. Stress levels, you know. The Morrison account. 23 years I'd worked with Jim Morrison. Built his construction business from a $50,000 line of credit to a $4.2 million relationship. Stress levels. I kept my voice level. Caroline smiled, that practiced HR smile. We're just concerned about your well-being, Tom. These large accounts require fresh energy. Fresh energy. Code for you're too old. I'll manage the Morrison account, I said. Of course, Caroline replied, but I saw her make a note. The second incident was worse. November 8th, quarterly performance reviews. Caroline called me into her office. All glass walls and modern furniture. Her Herman Miller chair probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She slid a folder across her desk. Your review, Tom. I opened it. Resistance to change initiatives. Difficulty adapting to digital platforms. Concerns about energy levels. Energy levels. There it was again. Who wrote this? It's aggregate feedback from colleagues. Her voice was smooth, professional. But I knew my colleagues. Richard Hayes had worked with me for 20 years. Janet Walsh, our operations VP, still asked my advice on complex loans. None of them had issues with my energy. Which colleagues? That's confidential, Tom. HR policy. I set the folder down. 35 years of clean reviews, and suddenly I'm a problem. But here's what Caroline didn't know. I'd started paying attention, real attention. That night I pulled my phone records. Caroline had called Steve 17 times in the past month. 17. They used to talk maybe twice monthly. I opened my laptop and did something I'd learned from Margaret during her cancer fight. She'd taught me about documentation, about keeping records when people try to control your narrative. I started a file. Caroline pattern recognition. Every meeting I was excluded from. Every account that got redistributed for efficiency. Every comment about my age disguised as concern for my health. The pattern was clear. Caroline wasn't worried about my well-being. She was positioning herself for my job. But she'd made a crucial error. She assumed that a 62-year-old widower would go quietly. That grief had made me weak. She was about to learn the difference between quiet and weak. Because while Caroline was playing corporate politics, I was remembering something she'd overlooked. In 35 years at Piedmont Regional, I hadn't just built relationships with clients. I'd built something else. Something that would make this whole situation very interesting. But first, I needed evidence. Real evidence. The kind that holds up in boardrooms and courtrooms. Caroline wanted to play games? Fine. But she was about to discover that experience beats ambition every single time. Let me explain what Caroline's little scheme would cost me. Because when you understand the numbers, you understand why staying quiet wasn't an option. First, the immediate hit. Forced early retirement at 62 meant a penalty on my pension. $280,000. Gone, just like that. The system punishes you for leaving before 65, and Caroline knew it. But that was just the beginning. My loan portfolio, the accounts I'd built over 3 decades, was worth $45 million to the bank. $45 million in active lending relationships. When those clients heard I was gone, how many would follow me out the door? Caroline thought she could just redistribute my accounts, hand them off to younger loan officers with MBA degrees and digital native credentials. She had no idea that banking isn't about spreadsheets and algorithms. It's about trust. Jim Morrison wouldn't work with some kid fresh out of college. Neither would Elena Rodriguez, who'd expanded her medical practice from 1 location to 7 with my guidance, or the Thompson family, whose agricultural operation I'd financed through 3 generations. These weren't just accounts. They were relationships. 35 years of handshakes, late-night calls, and standing by people when other banks wouldn't. But Caroline saw numbers on a screen. She thought loyalty was outdated, old-fashioned, something that could be optimized away. That's where she miscalculated. See, there's something else Caroline didn't factor into her timeline. The Christmas bonus structure at Piedmont Regional. If she could force me out before December 31st, she'd be positioned for promotion to senior vice president. $85,000 salary increase, plus performance bonuses tied to loan portfolio management. She wasn't just stealing my career. She was stealing my relationships to fund her own advancement. Then there was Steve, my son. Watching him nod along with Caroline's concerns, seeing him avoid my eyes during family dinners, that hurt worse than any financial penalty. Margaret and I had raised him to be honest, to have integrity, but Caroline had spent 2 years whispering in his ear, convincing him that his old man was stressed, overworked, potentially making poor decisions. Dad needs to enjoy his golden years, she'd say. He's given enough to that bank. Golden years. Like I was some broken-down horse ready for pasture. But here's what really made this personal. Caroline had started spreading concerns about my judgment to our clients. Subtle questions during bank events. How do you think Tom's handling the stress of recent changes? Have you noticed him seeming tired lately? She was poisoning the well, systematically. Elena Rodriguez called me the week before Thanksgiving. Tom, someone from your HR department asked about our satisfaction with your services. Is everything okay? That's when I knew. Caroline wasn't just planning my exit. She was building justification for it, creating a paper trail that would show the bank had legitimate concerns about my performance. The mathematics were simple. If I stayed silent, I'd lose my pension penalty, I'd lose my relationships, I'd lose my reputation, and I'd lose my son's respect, because he'd think I went quietly into that good night. But if I fought back, that was riskier. Caroline held the HR authority. She could document any conversation we had, frame any resistance as proving her point about my stress levels, unless I had something she didn't expect. Which brings me to November 16th. The morning after, I overheard her midnight conversation. I made 3 phone calls that morning, 3 calls that would change everything. The first was to Margaret Chen, our chief legal counsel. Maggie, I need to understand something about employment law, hypothetically. The second was to my old friend Larry Peterson at First National. Larry, who'd been trying to recruit me for 15 years. Larry, that offer you mentioned? Tell me more. The third call was the most important, to a number I hadn't dialed in 20 years. Hello, Sharon. It's Tom Bradley. I need to discuss my shareholding position at Piedmont Regional. Yes, it's time to make it official. Because here's what Caroline never knew. What no one at the bank knew, except the original founders and the legal department. When Piedmont Regional went through its reorganization in 1989, certain longtime employees were offered the opportunity to purchase founder shares. Not many people had the cash or the confidence to invest their life savings in the bank where they worked. I did. 35 years of steady purchases, small amounts. Never enough to trigger disclosure requirements. Never enough to attract attention. But enough to matter, enough to change everything. Caroline thought she was playing chess with an old man who didn't understand the rules. She was about to discover she'd been playing checkers, and I owned the board. November 17th. I decided it was time for a conversation. Caroline's office. Glass walls, expensive furniture, and that confidence that comes from thinking you hold all the cards. "Tom," she said, looking up from her computer, "what can I do for you?" I sat down across from her desk, opened my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since October. "I want to discuss my performance review. Of course, I understand you might have concerns. October 12th. You removed me from the Morrison account meeting. Reason given. Stress management." She nodded. "We discussed this." October 18th. You redistributed the Henderson loan to Mark Stevens. Reason, fresh perspective. "Tom, I'm not sure where this is going." November 1st. You excluded me from the quarterly planning session, said I needed work-life balance. Caroline leaned back in her chair, that practiced smile. "Tom, these decisions were made in your best interest." November 8th. You documented concerns about my energy levels based on colleague feedback. That's correct. Which colleagues? You know I can't share that information. I turned a page in my notebook. Richard Hayes. I asked him yesterday. He said no one contacted him about my performance. Her smile flickered. Just for a second. Janet Walsh. Same answer. Said she'd be happy to provide a reference any time. Tom, I think you're misunderstanding. Mark Stevens, young man you gave the Henderson account to. He told me something interesting. I let that hang in the air. Caroline's confidence was starting to crack. He said you asked him to document any conversations where I seemed confused or overwhelmed. Exact quote, "We need to build a case for Tom's transition." Caroline straightened in her chair. "I never said that. Mark has excellent notes. MBA training, you know. Very thorough documentation." She was quiet for a moment, calculating. "Tom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My job is to look out for everyone's well-being. Including your own? What's that supposed to mean?" I closed my notebook, looked directly at her. "Senior vice president position opens up if I leave before Christmas. $85,000 increase, plus bonuses tied to loan portfolio management." Caroline's face went pale. "You think this is about money? I think this is about opportunity. My opportunity becoming your opportunity." She stood up, walked to her window. When she turned back, the practiced HR smile was gone. "Tom, you're 62 years old. You've been through tremendous loss. Working 70-hour weeks isn't healthy at any age, but especially not now." "So this is medical advice?" "This is realistic advice. The banking industry is changing. Digital transformation, automated lending platforms, data analytics, the skills that made you successful 30 years ago are outdated, are different from what we need now." There it was, the real Caroline. No more gentle concern. Just ambition wrapped in corporate speak. Different how? "Tom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Answer the question. Different how?" Caroline sat back down, leaned forward. "Fine. You want honesty? Your approach to client relationships is inefficient. You spend hours on phone calls that could be handled with email. You resist our new digital lending platforms. You question every process improvement we implement. I question processes that don't work. You question processes that threaten your control." The room went quiet. She'd said too much, and she knew it. Control over what? Your little kingdom. Your special relationships. Your irreplaceable status. I smiled, actually smiled. Actually, because Caroline had just made this very easy. Irreplaceable? "Tom, no one is irreplaceable, not in modern banking." Interesting perspective. I stood up, picked up my notebook. "Caroline, I appreciate your honesty. Really. It clarifies things." "What does that mean?" "It means we understand each other now." I walked toward her office door, stopped, turned back. "One question. When you called Steve 17 times last month, did you discuss his inheritance planning?" Caroline froze. "How did you?" "Phone records, publicly available through the family plan billing." "That's private." "Family conversations about moving Dad to a retirement community, about managing his finances when he's no longer competent, about the burden of caring for aging parents." "Tom, you're twisting." November 15th, 11:43 p.m. You were on the phone with someone, discussing my early retirement package, the timeline, how I'd never see it coming. Caroline's face went white. "That's impossible. You weren't even home?" "I live there, Caroline. It's my house. She sat down hard in her chair. You have excellent soundproofing in the living room, but the kitchen shares a wall. Sound travels. Tom, whatever you think you heard was very clear, crystal clear. I opened her office door. Caroline, thank you for this conversation. It's been illuminating. Where are you going with this? I looked back at her, sitting behind that expensive desk, surrounded by glass walls, realizing that her perfect plan had a witness. I'm going to do what 35 years in banking taught me. Document everything, verify sources, and make very careful decisions based on facts. Tom, please. We're family. Yes, I said. We are. I left her office, walked past the cubicles where junior loan officers pretended not to watch, past Richard Hayes's office where he gave me a questioning look. Caroline thought she understood the game. Position politics, leverage. But she'd forgotten the most important rule in banking. Always know who you're really dealing with. That afternoon I made a trip I hadn't made in 15 years. Downtown Charlotte, First National Bank Building, 23rd floor. The offices of Henderson, Walsh and Associates, the law firm that handled Piedmont Regional's original incorporation. Sharon Walsh met me in the lobby. 20 years older, silver hair instead of brown, but the same sharp eyes that had negotiated our founder agreements back in 1989. Tom Bradley, I wondered when I'd see you again. Her office was old school, wood paneling, leather chairs, law books that actually got used. No glass walls, no modern furniture, just solid, permanent things. Sharon, I need to discuss my position at Piedmont. She pulled a file from her cabinet, thick, bound in blue leather. I've been wondering when you'd want to make this official. Make what official? Sharon opened the file, the original incorporation documents. Shareholder agreements, purchase records dating back 35 years. Tom, you own 19% of Piedmont Regional Bank. I nodded. I knew the number. Most people don't realize that makes you the second largest individual shareholder. Most people don't need to know. But some people do. She looked at me over her reading glasses, especially people who think they can force you out. I told her about Caroline, the performance reviews, the excluded meetings, the midnight conversation. Sharon listened, made notes, asked careful questions. Tom, what do you want to accomplish here? I want her to understand that actions have consequences. Legal consequences or professional consequences? Whatever consequences fit the actions. Sharon pulled out another folder. I've been tracking Piedmont's HR policies since Caroline arrived. Some interesting changes. She handed me a document. New performance evaluation criteria, implemented 6 months ago. Notice anything? I read through it. Age-related language. Subtle but consistent. Energy requirements. Adaptability to change. Long-term career planning. All phrased to sound neutral, but designed to target senior employees. Is that legal? It's borderline. The implementation is what matters. If someone's using these criteria selectively, they are. Then we have options. Sharon leaned back in her chair. Tom, I have to ask, why now? You could have disclosed your shareholding position years ago, made yourself untouchable. Because I never wanted to be the guy who hid behind ownership to avoid accountability. And now? Now someone's trying to destroy my reputation to advance their career. That's different. Sharon nodded. What about your son? That was the hard question, the one I'd been avoiding. Steve doesn't know about the shares? No one in my family knows. Margaret knew, but she's gone. This could complicate his marriage. His marriage is already complicated. He just doesn't see it yet. Sharon made another note. Tom, if we proceed, there's no going back. Once you reveal your ownership position, everything changes. Your relationship with the bank, with your colleagues, with your family. Everything's already changed. I'm just catching up. She smiled. All right. Here's what we'll do. For the next hour, Sharon outlined the legal framework, shareholder rights, board notification requirements, documentation standards. The key, she said, is timing. You reveal your position at exactly the right moment, maximum impact. When's that? When Caroline makes her next move. And trust me, she will. People like her can't help themselves. They always overreach. I left Sharon's office with a briefcase full of documents. 35 years of stock purchases, legal opinions, shareholder agreements. But more than that, I left with clarity. Caroline thought she was playing a game where she held all the power. where HR authority trumped everything else. She had no idea that the quiet old man she was trying to push aside actually had the ability to reshape the entire bank. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I arrived at work early, not because I was stressed or overworked, because I had work to do, real work, the kind that would teach a very ambitious young woman the difference between position and power. December 1st, quarterly client appreciation event, Piedmont Regional's biggest social gathering of the year, 200 clients, employees, community leaders, the kind of event where reputations are built or destroyed. I should have seen it coming. Caroline had been quiet since our conversation. Too quiet. In my experience, when ambitious people go silent, they're planning something big. The event was held at the Charlotte Country Club. Caroline had organized everything. She did excellent work, I'll give her that. Perfect details, smooth logistics, impressive presentation. I was working the room, talking with clients I'd known for decades. Jim Morrison was there with his wife Sarah. Elena Rodriguez brought her practice manager. The Thompson family drove in from their farm. Good conversations, strong relationships. The kind Caroline thought were outdated. Then Richard Hayes stepped to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. Before we conclude, I'd like to address something important. The room went quiet. This wasn't on the program. As you know, Piedmont Regional has always been built on relationships, personal connections, trust developed over years of partnership. I felt it coming. Whatever Caroline had planned, this was it. However, as our industry evolves, we must sometimes make difficult decisions about staffing and leadership. My clients were looking at me now, confused expressions, worried glances. It's with mixed emotions that I announced Tom Bradley will be transitioning to a consulting role, effective January 1st. The room erupted. Not applause, shocked murmurs, angry voices. Tom's dedicated 35 years to this institution. Richard continued reading from prepared remarks. He's earned a well-deserved rest. Jim Morrison stood up. What the hell does that mean? Transitioning. Jim, please. Tom's the best banker in the city. Why would you force him out? Elena Rodriguez joined in. This is ridiculous. Tom's helped me build everything I have. Richard looked uncomfortable. These weren't his words, and everyone could tell. The decision has been made with Tom's best interests in mind, his health, his family situation. That's enough. My voice cut through the noise. The room went silent. I walked to the front, took the microphone from Richard. Thank you, Richard. But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I looked out at 200 faces. Clients who trusted me, colleagues who'd worked with me for decades, community leaders who'd seen me build relationships one handshake at a time. I haven't agreed to transition to anything. Caroline was standing near the bar. Her face had gone pale. In fact, I haven't been consulted about any changes to my position. Jim Morrison called out, "What's really going on here, Tom?" "What's going on, Jim, is that someone decided my 35 years of experience was less valuable than their 2 years of modern thinking." I looked directly at Caroline. Someone decided that loyalty could be optimized away, that relationships were inefficient, that clients like you would be just as happy working with junior staff who understand digital platforms better than they understand people. Elena Rodriguez stood up. "Is this about age discrimination?" "That's a strong accusation, Elena, but let me share some facts." I pulled out my notebook, the one I'd been keeping since October. "In the past 8 weeks, I've been excluded from 12 client meetings, told it was for my own good, stress management." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I've had 3 major accounts redistributed, clients I've worked with for over a decade, again, for my own benefit." Jim Morrison's face was red with anger. "Who made these decisions?" "Our Director of Human Resources, Caroline Bradley." All eyes turned to Caroline. She stepped forward, that practiced confidence back in place. "Tom, this isn't the appropriate venue." "You're right. The appropriate venue was a private conversation, but those don't seem to work." Caroline smiled for the crowd. "Tom's been under tremendous stress since his wife's passing. We're simply trying to support him through a difficult transition." "Stress," I repeated. Interesting diagnosis from someone with a business degree. "Tom, please, tell me, Caroline. When you called my son 17 times last month, was that part of your professional assessment?" The smile disappeared. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I opened my notebook to a specific page. November 15th, 11:43 p.m. You were on the phone in my living room, discussing my early retirement package with someone. The timeline, how I'd never see it coming. Caroline's face went white. That's a private conversation. In my house, about my career. Nothing private about it. The room was completely silent now. 200 people watching a very public confrontation. You told whoever you were talking to that Steve was finally on board, that by Christmas I'd be gone and you'd have a clear path to VP. Tom, you're misunderstanding. Am I? Because it sounds like you've been planning my departure while pretending to be concerned about my well-being. Jim Morrison stood up again. Caroline, is this true? It's more complicated than... Yes or no? Elena Rodriguez called out. Have you been planning to force Tom out? Caroline looked around the room, 200 faces staring at her, waiting for an answer. Tom needs to consider his future. That's not what I asked, Elena said. Caroline's composure cracked. The banking industry is changing. Tom's approach, while valuable in the past, isn't aligned with current needs. Whose needs? Jim Morrison demanded. The bank's needs, the client's needs. I'm a client, Jim said. Tom's exactly what I need. So am I, Elena added. This sounds like corporate politics. Caroline looked at Richard Hayes, pleading for support. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, I said. Caroline wanted to make this public. Let's make it public. I looked out at the crowd, my clients, my friends, people who'd trusted me for decades. Caroline believes that modern banking means replacing relationships with processes, experience with algorithms, trust with efficiency metrics. I closed my notebook. I believe that banking is still about people, about keeping your word, about standing by your clients when other institutions won't. The applause started slowly. Jim Morrison first, then Elena, then others. So here's what I propose, I said. Let the clients decide. If you want to work with Caroline's modern approach, stay with Piedmont. If you prefer the old-fashioned way, well... I smiled. I'll be making some announcements very soon. December 3rd, emergency board meeting. Richard Hayes called it after half our major clients demanded explanations about the retirement announcement. Jim Morrison threatened to move his $4.2 million relationship. Elena Rodriguez asked for a written guarantee that I'd remain her banker. The boardroom felt different that morning. Italian marble table, high-backed chairs, oil paintings of Piedmont Regional's founders. Usually I sat in the back during board meetings, taking notes on loan approvals. Today, I sat at the table. Tom, said Patricia Williams, our board chairwoman, thank you for joining us. Caroline was there too, sitting across from me, still confident but wary. She'd seen the client reactions, knew her position was shakier than it had been 48 hours earlier. We need to address the situation from Saturday night, Patricia continued. The public confrontation was unfortunate. Richard Hayes shuffled his papers. Tom, Caroline tells us you've been resistant to transition planning. Transition to what? A consulting role, reduced responsibilities, more time with family. Who requested this transition? Caroline leaned forward. Tom, we've discussed your performance concerns. Whose concerns? Specifically? She hesitated. Multiple stakeholders. Names, Caroline. Give me names. I can't violate confidentiality. There is no confidentiality. I pulled out my notebook. I contacted every person you claimed had concerns about my performance. Richard Hayes, Janet Walsh, Mark Stevens, David Peterson, Lisa Crenshaw. I read from my notes. Richard said, quote, Tom's the most reliable loan officer we have. Janet said she'd be happy to recommend me for any position. Mark admitted you asked him to document signs of confusion or stress. Caroline's face was red. Tom, you're taking things out of context. Lisa Crenshaw said something particularly interesting. She said you asked her whether she thought I was, quote, becoming a liability to client relationships. Patricia Williams frowned. Caroline, is this accurate? I was conducting routine performance assessments. By asking colleagues to spy on me? That's not what... Then what would you call it? The room went quiet. Board members exchanged glances. Patricia cleared her throat. Tom, what exactly are you requesting from this board? Transparency. If there are performance issues, document them properly. If there are concerns about my capabilities, address them directly. If someone wants my position, they should say so. Caroline stood up. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Tom's becoming paranoid, defensive. Paranoid? I opened my briefcase. Caroline, let me ask you something. How much do you know about Piedmont Regional's ownership structure? What does that have to do with anything? Humor me. She looked around the table. Standard corporate structure, board of directors, shareholders, management hierarchy. Who are the major shareholders? The founding families hold majority control. Names? The Williams family, the Hayes family, the Peterson Group. What about individual shareholders? Non-founding members? Caroline shrugged. A few longtime employees have stock options. Stock options or actual shares? I'm not sure there's a difference for this discussion. I pulled out a folder. Blue leather binding, the one Sharon Walsh had prepared. Patricia, I'd like to make a disclosure to the board. Patricia looked confused. What kind of disclosure? A shareholding disclosure. The room went completely silent. I opened the folder. In 1989, when Piedmont Regional reorganized as a public corporation, certain employees were offered the opportunity to purchase founder shares. I handed Patricia the first document. Share certificate number 0047, 1,000 shares, purchased September 15th, 1989. Patricia's eyes widened. Tom, this is certificate 0094, 2,000 shares, March 1992. I handed her another document. Certificate 0156, 3,000 shares, July 1995. Caroline was staring at me. What is this? Certificate 0223, 5,000 shares, January 2001. Another document across the table. Certificate 0287, 4,000 shares, September 2008. I kept pulling documents. 35 years of stock purchases. Certificate 0334, 6,000 shares, December 2015. Certificate 0378, 3,000 shares, January 2020. Patricia was adding numbers on her notepad. Her face had gone pale. Tom, this totals 24,000 shares, 19% of outstanding stock. The room exploded. 19%? Richard Hayes stood up. Tom, that makes you the second largest individual shareholder. Yes. Caroline looked like she'd been hit by a truck. That's impossible. You're just a loan officer. I'm a loan officer who believes in the institution where he works. Patricia was studying the documents. These are all legitimate? Verified by Henderson, Walsh, and Associates. Sharon Walsh prepared the disclosure file. Why didn't you report this before? Because I never wanted to use ownership to influence operations, until someone decided to use HR authority to force me out. I looked directly at Caroline. You asked me about Piedmont's ownership structure. Well, now you know. The quiet old man you've been pushing toward retirement? He owns a substantial piece of this company. Caroline's voice was barely a whisper. You've been hiding this for 35 years? I've been building this for 35 years. Every bonus, every raise, every commission check. Instead of buying a bigger house or a fancy car, I bought stock in the company I believed in. Patricia looked around the table. Board members, I think we need to discuss this disclosure and its implications. Before you do, I said, there's something else. I pulled out my phone. Caroline, remember our conversation on November 17th, in your office? Her face went white. You didn't... North Carolina is a one-party consent state for recordings. I played the audio. Caroline's voice, crystal clear. Your little kingdom, your special relationships, your irreplaceable status. No one is irreplaceable. Not in modern banking. Then my voice. Interesting perspective. I stopped the recording. I have 14 similar recordings, all legal, all documenting systematic attempts to undermine my position based on age-related assumptions. Patricia Williams set down her pen. Caroline, I think we need to hear your response to these allegations. Caroline looked around the table, board members staring at her, documents spread across marble, audio evidence of her own words. This is taken out of context. Tom's been resistant to change. Change or control, Patricia asked. The banking industry requires modern leadership. Define modern. Caroline's composure finally shattered. He's 62 years old. He uses paper files. He spends hours on phone calls. He questions every digital initiative. And he's blocking progress. Whose progress? The bank's progress. Or your progress. Silence. Patricia looked at me. Tom, what outcome are you seeking? Respect, transparency, and accountability? I stood up. Caroline wanted to force me into retirement because she thought I was powerless. An old man with outdated methods and no leverage. I gestured to the documents on the table. She was wrong about the leverage. The board meeting ended with Caroline's resignation. Not immediately. Patricia Williams is too professional for summary dismissals, but the writing was on the wall, and Caroline could read. I'll need 2 weeks to transition my responsibilities, she said. 1 week, Patricia replied. Effective immediately, Tom Bradley resumes full authority over his client portfolio. Caroline left the boardroom without looking at me. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But what came next was the real payoff. December 5th. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Tom? It's Margaret Chen from Legal. We need to talk. Margaret had been digging into Caroline's files since the board meeting. What she found was worse than I'd imagined. Tom, she documented every interaction with you, every meeting, every conversation, every client contact, but she also documented something else. Margaret spread files across my desk. Performance evaluations for 6 other employees over 55, all showing sudden declines in ratings after Caroline arrived. I looked through the files. Janet Walsh, our operations VP, marked as resistant to technological adaptation. David Peterson, senior credit analyst. Concerns about long-term strategic thinking. It's a pattern, Margaret said. Age-related performance concerns across the board. Legal action. Solid case for systematic age discrimination, but it gets worse. She pulled out another file. Caroline's email correspondence with Executive Search Group, a headhunting firm in Atlanta. I read the emails. Caroline had been discussing modernization opportunities at Piedmont Regional, specifically the senior VP position that would open up when I was forced out. She had a job lined up? Senior VP of Human Resources at Atlantic Trust, $120,000 base salary. She was using our situation as a launching pad. That afternoon, I called Jim Morrison. Jim, can you meet me for coffee? There's something I need to discuss. We met at McGrath's, the diner where we'd done our first loan paperwork 23 years ago. Jim ordered his usual black coffee and apple pie. Tom, what the hell happened at that board meeting? I told him everything. The recordings, the stock ownership, Caroline's systematic plan. Jim listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So you own 19% of the bank? I do. And this Caroline woman was trying to force you out to advance her own career? She was. Jim shook his head. You know what pisses me off most? She thought we were idiots. How do you mean? She thought we'd just accept some kid fresh out of business school. Like loyalty doesn't matter. Like 23 years of working together counts for nothing. He leaned forward. Tom, I've got something to tell you. After Saturday night, Elena Rodriguez and I started making calls. What kind of calls? To other business owners. People who bank with Piedmont because of you. Jim pulled out a sheet of paper. We've got commitments from 16 major clients. If Caroline had succeeded in forcing you out, we were all moving our accounts. I looked at the list. $47 million in combined relationships. You organized this? Elena organized it. I just made some calls. Jim smiled. She's tougher than both of us put together. The next morning, I found Richard Hayes in his office. Richard, we need to discuss Caroline's replacement. He looked tired. The past week had aged him. Tom, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what was happening. You trusted your HR director. That's reasonable. Nearly cost us our best loan officer and half our client base. Nearly. But you didn't. Richard leaned back in his chair. The board wants to offer you the senior VP position. Caroline's job, plus loan portfolio management. I appreciate that, but I have a different suggestion. I pulled out a proposal I'd been working on. Promote Janet Walsh to Senior VP. She's earned it. Create a new position. Senior Client Relationship Manager. That's what I want to do. What would that involve? What I've always done. Build relationships, solve problems, help people achieve their financial goals, just with a title that reflects the value. Richard read through my proposal. This actually makes sense. Separate client relationship management from administrative HR functions. And Richard, I want final approval authority on any HR policies that affect client-facing staff. He looked up. You want veto power? I want oversight authority. As a 19% shareholder, I think that's reasonable. Richard smiled for the first time in days. Tom, you've been holding cards we didn't even know existed. The best cards are the ones people don't expect. That evening, I had dinner with Steve and Caroline, the conversation I'd been dreading. They sat across from me at the kitchen table. Caroline looked smaller somehow, defeated. Dad, Steve said, Caroline told me what happened. What did she tell you? That she misunderstood your situation, that she thought she was helping. I looked at Caroline. Is that what you told him? She nodded, couldn't meet my eyes. Caroline, Steve deserves the truth. Dad, what truth? I told him everything. The midnight conversation, the systematic undermining, the career advancement plan. Steve listened in silence. When I finished, he turned to Caroline. Is this accurate? She was crying now. I thought it would be better for everyone. Better how? If Tom retired, he could enjoy his remaining years. You wouldn't worry about him working so hard, and I could build a career that would secure our family's future. By destroying his career. I didn't see it that way. Steve stood up, walked to the window. When he turned back, his face was hard. Caroline, I think you should stay at your sister's tonight. Steve, please. We'll talk tomorrow, but right now I need to process this. After Caroline left, Steve and I sat in the kitchen. 2 hours of difficult conversation. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen what was happening. She's very persuasive, and she played on legitimate concerns. About your health, your stress levels, about change, about getting older, about being left behind. Steve nodded. Those are real fears. They are, but fear doesn't justify manipulation. What happens now? With Caroline, I mean. That's between you and her. But Steve, whatever you decide, make sure it's based on who she really is, not who she pretended to be. He left an hour later. I sat in my kitchen looking at the spot where I'd stood 11 days earlier, listening to a conversation that changed everything. Sometimes the quiet ones are just gathering evidence. Sometimes experience beats ambition. And sometimes the best revenge is simply revealing the truth. The consequences unfolded exactly as they should have. Caroline's resignation became effective December 12th. By December 15th, she'd withdrawn her application to Atlantic Trust. Word travels fast in banking circles, especially when it involves employment law violations. Margaret Chen's investigation uncovered systematic age discrimination affecting 7 employees. The legal department recommended settlements to avoid litigation. Total cost to Piedmont Regional, $430,000. Caroline's severance was reduced to 2 weeks' pay. No recommendation letter, no positive references. But the real consequence was more personal. Steve filed for separation on December 20th. I found out when he showed up at my house that evening, suitcase in his car. Dad, can I stay here for a while? Of course. What happened? We talked until midnight. Caroline had spent 2 weeks trying to justify her actions, blaming me for trapping her, claiming I'd manipulated the situation, insisting she'd been trying to help. She actually said you forced her hand by hiding your stock ownership, Steve told me. How did I force her to plan my retirement without consulting me? That's exactly what I asked. Steve rubbed his forehead. Dad, I keep thinking about all those phone calls, 17 times in 1 month. She was building a case against you, and I was helping. You didn't know. I should have known. You're my father. I should have trusted you over someone I'd known for 4 years. The divorce proceedings started in January. Caroline hired an aggressive attorney who tried to claim financial fraud. Tom Bradley concealed assets that affect the marital estate, her lawyer argued. Sharon Walsh handled our response. Tom Bradley's stock ownership predates this marriage by 15 years. His investment decisions were made with his own earnings, not community property. Caroline's attorney pushed harder. The concealment suggests a pattern of financial manipulation within the family. Or, Sharon replied, it suggests a conservative investor who preferred building wealth to flaunting it. The case fell apart when Caroline's attorney discovered the timeline. Every stock purchase documented, every payment traced to Tom's personal earnings, no community funds involved. Caroline's demand for spousal support was denied. Her claim on Steve's inheritance prospects was dismissed. But the most satisfying consequence was professional. By February, word had spread throughout Charlotte's banking community. Caroline Bradley, the ambitious HR director who tried to force out a major shareholder. The MBA who thought experience was obsolete. Her job applications were politely declined. 3 different banks, 2 credit unions, even a financial services startup passed on her resume. Overqualified, they said. Not a good cultural fit. In March, I heard she'd taken a position with a small accounting firm in Asheville. $45,000 a year. Entry-level responsibilities. A 2-year detour that cost her everything she'd been trying to achieve. Meanwhile, Piedmont Regional was thriving. My new title, Senior Client Relationship Manager, came with authority I'd never had before. Final approval on any policy affecting client services. Input on hiring decisions for customer-facing roles. Janet Walsh made an excellent Senior VP. She implemented technology improvements that actually improved efficiency without sacrificing relationships. The difference, she told me, is asking clients what they need instead of telling them what's modern. By April, we'd added 12 new major accounts. Word spreads when banks respect their senior employees. Business owners like working with institutions that value experience. Jim Morrison brought us his brother's construction company. Elena Rodriguez referred 3 medical practices. The Thompson family convinced 2 neighboring farms to switch their banking. Total new business, $18 million. Richard Hayes was delighted. Tom, your situation turned into the best marketing we could have asked for. How do you mean? Loyalty, integrity, standing by our people. Those are powerful selling points. But the most important consequence was personal. Steve and I rebuilt our relationship, slowly, carefully, but genuinely. He moved back to his own place in May, but we had dinner every Sunday. Real conversations. No Caroline mediating, interpreting, or manipulating. Dad, he said one evening, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Why didn't you tell me about the stock ownership? All those years you never mentioned it. I thought about that. Because I never wanted our relationship to be about money. But it's impressive. What you built. What's impressive is that you turned out to be a good man, despite having parents who weren't always perfect. Steve smiled. Mom was pretty close to perfect. Your mother was extraordinary, but even she made mistakes. Like what? Like worrying too much about whether we were giving you everything you needed, when what you needed most was to see parents who loved each other and worked hard and kept their word. You did show me that. We tried. In June, Caroline reached out through Steve's attorney. She wanted to apologize, to explain her actions, to ask for forgiveness. Steve asked what I thought he should do. That's your decision, but if you do meet with her, remember something. What's that? Apologies don't undo consequences. They're just words. Judge her by her actions, not her explanations. Steve met with Caroline once. He came home quiet, thoughtful. How did it go? She's still blaming circumstances, still claiming she thought she was helping. Do you believe her? I believe she believes it, but that's not the same thing. Steve looked at me. Dad, I learned something important from all this. What's that? Family loyalty isn't automatic. It has to be earned, and it can be lost. By Christmas, exactly 1 year after Caroline's planned timeline for my departure, Piedmont Regional reported record profits. Client satisfaction scores hit all-time highs. Employee retention improved dramatically. The board voted me a special recognition bonus. Not because I'm a shareholder, but because I'd helped the bank avoid a catastrophic mistake. What mistake? I asked Patricia Williams. Confusing change with improvement, mistaking ambition for competence, nearly losing our institutional knowledge to someone who thought wisdom was outdated. That night, I sat in my kitchen, the same spot where I'd overheard a conversation that changed everything. Sometimes people reveal exactly who they are when they think no one's listening. Sometimes the quiet ones are just gathering evidence, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Today, 18 months later, my life looks different than Caroline ever imagined. I'm still at Piedmont Regional, still working with clients who value relationships over algorithms, still proving that experience and wisdom have a place in modern banking. But I've established new boundaries. No more tolerating disrespect disguised as concern. No more allowing ambitious people to weaponize my modesty against me. No more assuming that family loyalty is unconditional. Steve learned similar lessons. He's dating again. A teacher named Rachel who values honesty over strategy. She's met me 3 times and never once suggested I should consider retirement. She's different, Steve told me last month. How? She asks questions instead of making assumptions. She listens instead of planning. That's wisdom earned the hard way. Caroline, I heard she's engaged to an accountant in Asheville, someone who doesn't know her history, someone who sees her MBA and assumes competence. I hope it works out. Everyone deserves a chance to learn from their mistakes, but I've learned something too. Quiet strength isn't the same as weakness. Experience isn't outdated, it's just harder to fake, and sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person you shouldn't cross. My clients understand this. Jim Morrison still calls me for advice, even on deals that don't involve the bank. Elena Rodriguez asked me to speak at her practice management conference about building long-term business relationships. Tom, she said, you proved something important. That loyalty goes both ways. When someone stands by their clients, clients stand by them. The Thompson family invited me to their farm for Christmas dinner. 3 generations around one table sharing stories about perseverance and family values. Mr. Bradley, their youngest son, asked, why do you think that lady tried to make you retire? Because she thought position was more important than relationships. Was she wrong? What do you think? He looked around the table at his family. I think relationships are everything. Smart kid. He'll do well in whatever field he chooses. These days, I mentor young bankers who join Piedmont Regional. Not about spreadsheets or digital platforms. They learn that in school. About judgment. About reading people. About keeping your word even when it's inconvenient. Mr. Bradley, one recent graduate asked, how do you know when someone's trustworthy? Watch what they do when they think no one's paying attention. And if they're not trustworthy, document everything, verify sources, and remember that sometimes the best response is patience. That's the lesson Caroline taught me, though she never intended to. Sometimes people reveal their true character when they feel powerful. Sometimes ambition overrides judgment. Sometimes the person who seems to have all the advantages actually holds the weakest hand. Last week, Richard Hayes announced his retirement. The board asked me to consider the president's position. I declined. I like what I do, building relationships, solving problems, helping people achieve their financial goals. But I made a suggestion. Promote Janet Walsh. She's earned it. What about you? I'm exactly where I belong. Because here's what I've learned in 64 years. Success isn't about climbing ladders or accumulating titles. It's about doing work that matters with people you respect. It's about building something lasting instead of just building your resume. It's about understanding that quiet strength beats loud ambition every single time. Caroline thought she was playing chess with someone who didn't understand the rules. She was right about one thing. I don't play by her rules. I play by older rules, better rules. Rules that value character over cleverness, relationships over transactions, wisdom over information. Rules that build things instead of just taking them. If you're facing something similar, someone trying to push you aside, dismiss your experience, or steal what you've built, remember this story. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And never underestimate the power of patient preparation. Sometimes the quiet ones aren't just gathering evidence. Sometimes they're gathering strength. And sometimes that makes all the difference. What's your story of standing up to workplace manipulation? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you established your own boundaries.